So hi, thank you for being here. This is amazing. I love the disco ball. So before we start, one quick question or two into the audience so I get a feeling of who you are and what you know. Who here in the audience would be comfortable enough to explain blockchain to someone else? Okay, so we got 10%? Okay. Who knows what smart contracts are and would be comfortable to explain smart contracts to someone else? A bit less. And who knows what an ICO is? Okay. All right, so we need to start with the fundamentals, as I can see. I hope to give you a good overview. So before we talk about the new kids on the blockchain, we need to understand what is the blockchain, and I'd like to refer to it as the driving force for the next generation internet. So to understand the next generation internet, let's look at the history of the internet. And if we look back into the 90s, the World Wide Web really revolutionized information, and this is why we called it the information data highway. Around 10 years later, the Web 2 came. And there was a huge buzz about it, because all of a sudden the internet became more mature, and the Web 2 revolutionized our interactions with each other. On one hand, it brought us social media, and on the other hand, it brought us all those e-commerce platforms, where producers and consumers would merge into one role, and it brought us this peer-to-peer economy of sharing information, goods, and services, but always with a platform in the middle, always with the man in the middle. A platform dictating the terms and conditions of the interaction, and a platform also holding all our data. Now, if we look at blockchain, this can be the driving force for what we also call the Web 3, and it will revolutionize our transactions. It's like a transactional layer, and it will bring us peer-to-peer transactions without the middleman. And this all started around 8 years ago with Bitcoin. And Bitcoin really is peer-to-peer money without banks and bank managers. I can basically send you, and we don't know each other, we don't trust each other, I can send you money via Bitcoin, and the transaction doesn't get verified by a bank, it gets verified by this peer-to-peer network. So it's money without banks. And we can do a lot more with it, but in order to understand why this is possible, we have to understand how the internet now works. We first had the computer, and the first ones more or less looked like this. And then we connected all those computers with the internet. And even though over the last 30 years we connected more and more devices with each other, first the big computers, then the mobile phones, and now we've reached Internet of Things. Even though we live in a more and more connected world, we still communicate, those computers still communicate over this one internet protocol, client-server protocol, where data is stored centrally on one computer and retrieved from another computer over the IP protocol. Why is that important? Because data storage, even though we're super connected, is still local. It's locally stored on our devices, on the removable devices, and also in the cloud. It's stored centrally on a central computer somewhere else. So this brings a lot of issues, and we've been talking about those issues over the last decade. Who owns my data? How secure is my data? And can I trust those entities who manage this data and verify the transactions based on this data? So basically, blockchain decentralizes trust. It's this protocol that can act as a trust machine on top of the internet. And we're moving away from a world of data monarchy, where data is stored centrally, to a world of data democracy, where we are reinventing data structures. Data is not stored centrally anymore, and transactions are verified by majority consensus of the network. This is a big game changer. So basically, if you would try to tamper data, tamper a transaction on one of the computers in the network, the rest of the network would say, that's wrong, we have different information. So we don't need central trusted third parties anymore. And the real killer application on that peer-to-peer network, on that blockchain, is the smart contract. So the smart contract unfortunately isn't very smart, and it's not a legal contract either. It's more like a digital handshake that runs on top of the blockchain. It's a piece of code that encodes all the rules of a certain transaction, and when the conditions of that transaction are met, the code is automatically enforced by that peer-to-peer network. You can think of a smart contract like a referee or a chessboard manager, like that person or entity that makes sure that after the rules of a game have been defined, the players can only make moves according to those predefined rules. If they try to make a move that diverges from those rules, they're not allowed to do that. And basically, the smart contract acts in the same way. So as opposed to the world we live in today, where contracts are printed on paper and signed by hand, in the future, with those smart contracts that are written in code and signed with your private key, which acts like a password, and looks like this, in the future, we will have automatically enforceable smart contracts. And you can think of this machine as a primitive form of a smart contract. It has certain rules embedded into the machine. You need to select a certain number, put enough money into it, and then you will get the product and maybe some change if it's necessary. And if you don't put enough money, you don't get the product. If you put enough money, but there is no product inside, you get your money back. So that is a very primitive form of a smart contract. And based on those smart contracts, we can now create this internet of agreements where we have peer-to-peer transactions without the middleman. And as I said before, the first of those blockchains was Bitcoin. The technology behind it really wasn't that dominant at that time. But since Bitcoin was open source, anyone could take the code, modify it, and do their own better version of Bitcoin. And this is what many people did. So projects came along like Litecoin, Monero, Zcash, inspired by the Bitcoin blockchain, trying to do a better peer-to-peer currency, a better, faster, more secure, or more anonymous money without banks. Then Ethereum came along, and Ethereum said, wait a second, we can take this very powerful technology, modify it a bit, and create it in a way that everyone can build smart contracts on top of it, and not only smart contracts that make sure that you can send money peer-to-peer, but really any kind of value transaction. So basically, you could have not only money without banks, but you could have apartment sharing without Airbnb, ride sharing without Uber, or buying books from a bookseller without Amazon. So the big claim here is disrupt the disruptors. That's not only a claim. The first startups are already starting to build on top of Ethereum. Ride sharing without Uber, that's an actual startup doing that stuff. We have insurances without insurance companies, etc. And most of them are building on that Ethereum network, on that decentralized world computer, as the Ethereum people like to call that network. And those smart contracts run on top of it. Now, some of you have already heard of ICOs. So what happened is that blockchain is also, because of that automatically enforceable code, a very powerful tool for projects to raise funds, to issue their own token of transaction, give it their own properties and a name, and do a so-called ICO. And an ICO stands for Initial Coin Offering. And you can think of an ICO like an IPO, which is an initial public offering, where companies sell shares of their company to the general public. And ICOs are similar to IPOs, only that they run and are issued on top of a blockchain at much lower transaction costs. And 2016, 2017, we've seen many of those ICOs happen. a lot of them raising millions of dollars in cryptocurrencies within a few seconds or within a few minutes, they're sold out. So we had like within 10 minutes, $2 million, one ICO. And we had a few weeks ago, one ICO raising 300 million without a few minutes. So this is becoming a big thing. There is also very big hype. Unfortunately, there is sometimes maybe a little bit lack of knowledge of what those coins really are. Because these tokens of transaction that these projects are issuing have very different properties and very different roles. And I'm not sure if everybody is aware of this. So basically, when projects issue their tokens and they get traded, they can get traded on cryptocurrency exchanges, and you can go to a platform like CoinMarketCap and see what the price of those tokens is and what the market cap of those tokens are. Unfortunately, all those different tokens that have different properties are listed on the same page, and it's hard to distinguish what is what, because some tokens are blockchain tokens. Some tokens are application tokens. Some tokens are a currency. Bitcoin is the token of transaction of the Bitcoin network. Zcash is also a cryptocurrency. Monero is a currency. But on the other hand, we have Ethereum. Its token of transaction, Ether, is not really a cryptocurrency. It's kind of like gas for the Ethereum world computer to function. You pay transaction costs with that token of transaction. And it was never intended to be a cryptocurrency. On the other hand, a lot of the projects raising money with those ICOs, when they issue their tokens, those tokens very often have the role of a share in their future company with different properties. So unfortunately, the term coin is very often misleading. Nevertheless, this thing is happening. ICOs are a great vehicle for blockchain-based companies to raise money. It's kind of like Kickstarter 3.0. There is a big hype happening in the sense that a lot of money is pushing into the market right now, but the technology definitely has the potential to get there eventually. So ask yourself what type of token, if you ever invest, are you investing in? Ask yourself whether there are legal uncertainties tied to that. Because the problem is that blockchains is still confronted with a lot of regulatory uncertainties. If you don't know if the token is a cryptocurrency, a currency, or a share, depending on what it is, different laws would potentially apply. And then the question is, usually in the Web 2, national legal silos made sure that the law applies of where the server is, but which law applies in a peer-to-peer network. So as you can see, we're still in the very early stages. The technology has a lot of potential, but there are many uncertainties. There are other issues. It's so new. Scalability is an issue. Blockchains are still very slow. You can't have a lot of transactions on top of them. Identity is an issue. Privacy still is an issue. We don't always know what the future business models will be on those open peer-to-peer networks. Regulatory challenges. Many startups are faced with the challenge that they don't know if they're potentially breaking laws because it's just unregulated yet. And it's a very new form of doing things. And roles of tokens sometimes are hybrid. And we don't have the network effects yet that will be necessary for many business models to really start flying off. So think of 1990, and for those of you who were old enough to remember, email in the 1990s, when we still used command line to send emails. We're more or less there when it comes to blockchain. So it's already here. The first killer application is Bitcoin. Back in the 1990s, email was the first killer application. But we really don't know what is yet to come. We have some ideas, but only time will tell how this will pan out. Regardless, the future will be definitely more decentralized than it is now. And giving a bit of an outlook also to the talks that are going to follow up now, blockchain really isn't an isolated technology. We will hear enough about Internet of Things and AI in the following talks. blockchain will power Internet of Things with its automatically enforceable smart contracts. AI can power blockchain in a great way. And all these technologies haven't reached their inflection point yet. And I believe that around 10 years from now, when blockchain, AI, Internet of Things, 3D printing, when these technologies take off, when they have reached their inflection point, we might live in a very, very different future. So if you're interested to read up on more about blockchain, we have a lot of resources on our website. Follow us on social media, or me personally, or approach me after the talk. Thank you.